Hello everybody and welcome to today's IEP Live Learn Lunch. I'm really excited to be joined today by was the right word the first time, Louise Doyle from Mesma. So with no further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Louise, but in the meantime, just before I do want to say, please make sure you're using the chat to interact, to ask questions, and to share your thoughts with Louise throughout the session, and we will do a Q&A at the end for any questions that you have. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you very much, Helen, and it's really good to see you. Particularly, I was saying to Helen before, the very fact that there are some people who aren't trying to get a holiday at the moment is a wonderful thing. So I'm grateful for you coming along today. Helen, I'm going to turn your screen off so I can share mine. And we can get going because, as you said, I'm mindful people are kind of in their lunch break. So I've summarised the session that we're going to cover today as self-assessing brilliantly. I'm really interested, Helen picked up on it in your partly your reason for being here. Actually, don't feel like you've got to answer that now, but as we go through, asking questions that you've got, making comments that you've got, and I'm a great believer in all things webinar related, that we share experiences and support one another by bringing our own voice into it. So please don't be shy. What we're going to talk about is I think the official title said talking about making organizational self-evaluation and improvement planning work for you as a process. If I just get the screen to work. I've got a kind of outline for that. I will happily take your mind off the weather as well, Helen. Outline for today, the case for self-assessment. I want to kind of go back up a level and think, if you look at broader quality management and governance, where self-assessment fits into that. So I'm going to start off by doing that. I'll then go into the detail of kind of the title of today, the self-assessing brilliantly, sharing our experiences of what we have learned over the years. And I'll talk very briefly about that in a second. A section that I've called being constantly curious. So, you know, kind of that point around good quality assurance and quality improvement is built around a constant curiosity. And the final section I've called improvement plan like a ninja. So some hopefully really simple things that, again, we see time after time perhaps not being done so well because they're not always easy to do well, and suggesting to you how you might want to use them in your own context. So as Helen said, I'm the CEO of Mesma, and we very much focused on supporting our clients to do what matters most for the people who matter most to you, and that is, of course, in the employment support sector, your customers. We do that through two things. We have a software platform that's used from everyone from regulatory bodies through to individual providers, and we also do that through a whole load of consultancy stuff as well. So the only reason for telling you that is because I hope that I can bring that experience to the fore in the time that we have together, to share it with you in a way that you will find helpful and practical and useful. So let's get going. Let me start with what I've called the case for self-assessment. So this is kind of the opening, dare I call it, strategic view of it, because it's about thinking how it nests within the other things that you might do in order for you to decide whether or not it's something you want to and need to invest your time and effort in. And I'll perhaps ask you some questions about that in a short while. For any of you who read the IEP journal, the article that Scott had asked me to write for that was very much around why quality management is important within an employment support space. And certainly we've seen an increasing emphasis on that from our colleagues at the Department for Work and Pensions. So it was trying to kind of riff on that and get organisational leaders and managers and quality experts to think about where it might fit in. So if we were taking the headlines of what quality management is, and feel free to add your own interpretations if you'd like to do this as well in the chat, it is an overarching term, sometimes I have to say used interchangeably, that is part of effective governance. There are other things within effective governance, but it is part of effective governance. Effective quality assurance, so assuring ourselves that we are meeting minimum requirements and improving in order to go above and beyond that. And the three that I've highlighted in green are because they directly link to our topic for today around self-evaluation or self-assessment. So the ability to objectively evaluate service. The word objectivity, if I could have it in flashing lights, would be the thing that I would do, because actually it's incredibly hard to objectively evaluate our own service because of the very fact that it is our own service. So self-assessment is essentially about the tools and techniques that allow you to bring objectivity into the process and mitigate the risk of natural subjectivity that will always exist when we feel really strongly about something. How that then links to improvement prioritization and implementation, because actually what's the point of evaluating and bringing quality management in if you don't do something about the things that need something done about them? And the last point is making that distinction from compliance, because quality and compliance are often used interchangeably, and I have found over the years in employment support actually that's particularly so. So the way that I position it is quality management moves you beyond compliance by not just asking if something is happening, which is important, but more importantly, where it is happening, is it happening well? And the happening well is ultimately, of course, about the impact of doing something. So we can be very compliant, but actually, does it ultimately have a positive impact on the service that you're delivering is a different question. And I often use the phrase, the weighing the pig. It's very easy to get into the weighing the pig scenario. So looking at it, oh, that's great. But actually, in reality, has it made a difference to the quality of the service that you offer? So those bits in green are the bits that we'll unpick when we talk about self-assessment today. I've taken that to another step and said, okay, you could actually say that quality assurance in its own right. So when you looked at the first two, I said on the last slide, effective governance and effective quality assurance are features of quality management. You could argue that quality assurance in its own right is a feature of effective governance, because actually it supports your ability as an organisation to drive accountability, so that golden thread right the way through your organisation, from your strategy and your quality performance indicators, right the way through to your really important guys who work on the front line interacting with your customers every day. It allows you to build capacity, because how can you get better if you don't know what better looks like and you're not able to share that both internally within the organisation, but also within your partner networks that you work with formally and informally as well. And of course, how it informs strategic thinking. And for me, what's really interesting in an employment support space is because by very nature of what you do in the cyclical and the contractual nature of it, we understandably get sucked into the detail of the contract, and really effective quality assurance essentially takes you above the contracts. It says if we looked at everything across the contracts, then what does quality look like? And we're doing some interesting work with the IEP at the moment around what that does look like, and then how you then interpret that within the context of a particular contract. But you guys know all of that, so I won't go any further in teaching Granny to suck eggs. The arrow is important in the words co. I really want to hone in on today. It's if we are to do quality assurance and improvement well, then it's that sense of co-investigation, co-evaluation. Too often, both within education, which this is probably more steeped in as a process when we think about self-assessment, as well as in employment support, when quality assurance isn't done as well, it belongs to a person. So it's that person's job to do quality. It's that department's job to do quality. And for any of you who might be nodding at that because you happen to be in a quality role, I feel your pain. It can't belong to a department. It has to belong to the business. And I will always start with the colleagues I work with, the leadership teams I work with, in saying, well, let's talk about what you talk about around your board table. Because actually, if quality doesn't get its voice around the board table and it's very much numbers driven, then you kind of you get what you get. That golden thread isn't just about what we push down to our guys who are dealing directly with the customer when I talk about hierarchy. It's what's talked about at board level table. So self-assessment has to work its way right the way through those levels. Feel free to add anything at the chat on the last couple of slides if there's anything there that either jars with you because you don't see that, or resonates with you, because it would be really interesting to have you share that with each other. And just the usual reminder to turn it to everyone and not just so I can see it, so that everyone can see your comments if you're happy for that to happen. Okay, let's move on. So this is by no means an exhaustive diagram, but it's the basics of a diagram of what an effective quality assurance cycle often looks like. There will be other methods within here, and again, I'd love to hear through the chat what you use in your own organizations to deploy it. So I'll just show you some of the things that go around the cycle, and then I'll come and pick up some of your comments. So I'm going to start over at 11 p.m. So the clear quality performance indicators, which I'll now start to call QPIs, and also a benchmark. I think for employment support, this is such an interesting space and something actually even beyond my geekery around quality improvement to get really quite excited by. And I'm going to compare it to the education sector, partly because I know some of you have got a foot in it, but also because it's the one that I think even if you haven't, you would understand. It is surprising, perhaps, how often quality performance indicators aren't as well defined as they ought to be. And I level that comment both in employment support, but also actually in further education. We often have key performance indicators, so I'm not suggesting for 1 second those metrics aren't there, of course they are. But they can often be very binary, and the sense of quality doesn't always come through in them. So the most obvious example I can give you is at that board table again. If we're achieving our job outcome targets that are relevant to that contract, how concerned are we with the way those outcomes have been achieved? And yes, the measure of sustainability in there, starts to play a part in that, but there is still much more to the quality of what's happening in the customer's journey that are more important than just the outcome in its own right. And actually, if you flip that the other way, you can offer an exceptionally good service, but it doesn't always get you the outcome for reasons that you guys know and love. So it's thinking about how we get those things in balance. The bit around benchmark, I think, is fascinating within the employment support sector, and something that we're working on with IEP and hopefully with some of you guys as part of some roundtables in the future, in thinking about what that benchmark looks like. So lots of your organizations have created perhaps your own quality benchmark, because how can you self-assess if you don't know what you're self-assessing against? Whereas if we take the education example, then in England and Scotland, in Wales and in Northern Ireland and lots of other places in the world, that benchmark is set for you externally. So in England, it would be the Ofsted framework. Now that gives you a very clear starting point. There's still a need to internalize that. So Ofsted's framework is helpful, but actually what does that mean to us and our own learners if we happen to be in an education space? And within employment support, you don't quite have that in the same way. So yes, you've got the matrix standard. In days of old, you would have had other things in there as well, such as Merlin, but that comprehensive sense of what the benchmark looks like, I think, is a gap perhaps about where we can learn and support one another to keep getting better. So that's the start point. What is it that your quality performance indicators look like, and what is the benchmark that we're essentially saying that we're self-assessing or we're quality assuring against? Now, the methods that I put on here, I've said are not exhaustive. I've talked about the obvious one, which is around observation of practice. What is it that you observe? What are you looking for? How do you use observation? How does it fit within your performance structure? I'll talk something about culture around that later on. How you go about gathering feedback from stakeholders, what I've referred to as thematic and data review, so that you deep dive into particular topics or subjects or activities to look at what quality looks like. And what sits around that cycle is around self-evaluation and improvement planning. And the best way I can describe it, if you've never come across it before, is that it is the summation of all of those other things. So if that's what we said our benchmark is, and that's what we say our quality and performance indicators are, our QPIs are, and we've gone through all of these other methods of checking in and looking where the improvements are, your self-evaluation and improvement plan is your summation at team, department, organizational national level, at regional level, wherever, at contract level, how does that all look when we pull it into the round, when we look at this from all of those different angles? Thank you, Martin's just in the chat. Quality doesn't belong to a single person or department. Love it. It really doesn't. It just can't work, can it? It's cultural, and I will come back to the point of culture very soon to pick up on. So I've put some questions for you to consider. I know you'll get the recording of this, but feel free to kind of take a photo if there are questions you would want to go away and talk to colleagues about. And I'd love you again in the chat to feel free to share your thoughts on these things when you reflect on your own quality assurance process, what I always call reviewing the reviewing. You've got to be as objective about the effectiveness of the way you quality assure as you do everything else. So the questions for you to consider: does your organisation, number one, define quality performance indicators or use internal or external benchmarks? I think is a great place to start. The second question, when you think about that quality cycle that I showed you, do you use some or all of those quality cycle activities? And the third one, are there others that you use that are not on there? I'm sure there are. And the final big question, that reviewing the reviewing, is actually, but how impactful are they? So the weighing the pig thing, or we do loads of quality assurance, but actually, does it have any impact on the quality of the service that you deliver? Because if it doesn't, then you need to strip it back and work out which bits make the most difference. And as a self-confessed self-assessment geeky person, then I think when it's done well, it can have an enormous impact on the quality of what you do, but it has to be done well rather than it perhaps being a paper exercise. So those 4 questions, like I said, if you want to comment on the chat, please do. If not, take them away, have that conversation with colleagues about it to see where you land. So now let me take you down the funnel. Talked strategic, talked about quality management, hopefully giving you a sense of where self-assessment fits within a generic quality assurance cycle for you guys to consider and think about. And let me now go into self-assessment very specifically for a little while and talk to you about that as a discipline. So this is a busy slide, bear with me, I'll read them all to you just so you can kind of get a sense of what I mean by them. We read and we support, and people use our software platform. So therefore we see thousands of self-assessment reports and improvement plans. We see thousands when people allow us to, I should say, so it's not a case of us going in and just looking at them. When people want us to, we will give feedback and we support them through it. And these are some of the things that we see on repeat. And I thought I'd share them with you as a try not to do this. And again, as I'm going through them, perhaps pick out the ones that resonate most with you, or equally you say, we don't do that, we do a great job of it, because people I'm sure would love to hear your experiences. So number 1, the purpose of self-assessment is misunderstood or misused. What I mean by that one is it is misunderstood and misused when people think that what you write in it is what the people around that board table want to hear. And it is intrinsically linked with culture, because I'm not going to write something in the report that implies me or my team or my department aren't doing a very good job of something if I think I'm going to get a load of grief for that, rather than be supported in how to improve it. So sometimes I see self-assessment reports that are overly vanilla because culturally there isn't that willingness to allow people to fail. So I think it can tell you a lot about your organisational culture, let alone what it's telling you about quality of service. Second one, high on narrative, low on evaluation. Me telling you something has happened, so we deliver this and we meet the customer every 12 weeks, and this happens, is not an evaluation. It's telling me that it's happening. What I want to know is it being done well? So getting the balance of that right is important and actually quite hard to do. A disjoint between the self-assessment and the quality improvement plan. So this is what we've said we're doing well or we're not. And then I read quality improvement plans and I can't see the self-assessment within it. And I'll talk to you about that a bit later on. That fabulous question, so what? So when you see something written, and this comes back a little bit to the high on narrative and low on evaluation, so what? What's the impact of doing that? Is the question to keep coming back to. Self-assessment being written in the future tense. I have quite a lot of arguments with senior leaders about this, because particularly if they think it's going external, and that's the downside of an Ofsted type scenario where you've got a regulator kind of driving the process. A self-assessment is written in the now, so it's this is what is happening, or this is what isn't happening, or this is what's happening sometimes but not others. When people are nervous, so it comes back to the top one about how their self-assessment would be interpreted, they'll write it in the future tense. And normally that's positioned as we have an opportunity to improve. I don't care what your opportunity to improve is. I want to know what the issue was that resulted in you thinking that there is an opportunity to improve. So write it in the current tense. A cut and paste from last year. There's nothing wrong, by the way, with cutting and pasting self-assessments if the same thing still applies. The key is has the evaluation gone into the fact of why, if that was in last year, is it still happening this year? Now, that might be because it's really good, so you want to keep reflecting that it's still really good. But if it's an issue that was identified last year and you're about to copy and paste it into another self-assessment report, there is a critical evaluation point there about why haven't we fixed this, but particularly if it's a priority area. Second from the bottom, your improvement plan is an operational to-do list, so it becomes a huge nightmarish scenario where on top of your already crazy busy day jobs, you've got 300 things on an improvement plan. It should be strategic, and I'll talk to you about that when we talk about improvement planning like a ninja later. And the last one, improvement plan progress based on only on action implemented. And again, I'm going to come back to that a bit later on when we talk about improvement planning like a ninja. Okay, so if that's what we see in our work, what I want to do is give you some simple stuff in the time we've got today to try to overcome those things, either because you're starting out on using self-assessment as part of your quality assurance cycle, or you want to reflect on what's working and not working with it because you already do it. Let me take you forward. I'm going to definitely get you to put something in the chat now. So I've got a rating scale for you. It's a very loose one. Obviously, I will not read them out. So anything you put in the chat at this point will not be read out. It will be very much kept within this group who are here today because you came and turned up. So the first one, the question is, how would you rate your organisation's approach to self-assessment and improvement planning as part of a quality assurance cycle? And I've put at the top as a 10. It is a highly collaborative activity that impacts positively on the customer's experience. And I've put as a 1, it is a paper exercise, usually left to one person to complete, and has little impact on the customer experience. You can't be a 5, because that's sitting on the fence. So we're either 6 to 10 or we're in 1 to 4 territory. You can also, of course, put in, we don't currently use self-assessment, so feel free to do that. So I'm going to go quiet so I can get you to just use the chat. Just put a number in. If you want to say more, feel free to do so, but don't feel like you have to. Thank you very much. The person who's just put their first one in. Because that's above a 5, if you don't mind, perhaps just say a little bit more about why we're in that top space. What is it that you do that you think is working particularly well in that self-assessment process? So it'd be great to hear that. I like that, a safe, a safe 6.5. Same question again. If we're in 6+, then let's talk about why we think that is. If anyone scores below that, I won't get you to say anything more about it. But if you're going in the top end, let's hear a bit more. Anyone else want to add anything in there? I'm going to keep having to move just because of getting as much as I can today, but don't be shy. There's more of you here who can type something in there, and I will not read your names out or put your score next to it. Okay, let me go on to the next one. So while you are still pondering, for the people I haven't heard from, thank you very much I'm just going to read it to make sure that there's nothing in there you wouldn't want me to say. So the comment that's come back around the 6, I feel like the assessment is there to genuinely help us improve as opposed to simply a judgment. And it's such a great comment to make, because that's exactly the issue to avoid, isn't it? Is if it feels like you're being judged, and that judgment will be used in a way that is perceived to be negative, even if actually that isn't the essence of it, then that's where you want to be, isn't it? It's a supportive process that helps us all to collectively get better. We've got a high number 9 in there. I'm just reading it again just to make sure there's nothing that you wouldn't want me to say. Consistently looking at how we can individually and team-wise improve the customer's experience. Never give a perfect 10 to anything. I'm with you on that, but it's great to see it being such a positive process. Next one, I'm just checking I can read it. Yeah, in my division, we were given topics to collaborate with colleagues and feedback to the quality team, which is great to hear. It's kind of a thematic review type approach as well to consider. Thank you very much for that, guys. Okay, let me take you on. So self-assessment at its best is a keep it simple mantra from me. We start on the left-hand side. Do we know what our benchmark is? What is it that we are self-assessing against? And do we have clear quality performance indicators that support that journey of self-reflection? And that's it, as people have picked up on, that individual, team, organisational, regional, contract level. Second step, what evidence base are we using in order to tell us whether or not these things are happening? And it's a really interesting exercise, actually, just asking different people what they think the evidence would be, because you might be surprised at how different sometimes that can come up. And their ease of accessing that evidence. One of the challenges I know you guys often have is around the complexity of your data, where it is, whether or not it's in different systems. So even just getting to the point of getting to the evidence can be difficult sometimes. So I know that can sometimes be a barrier. Third one, balanced collaborative evaluation of evidence. It's fantastic to hear in the chat, some of you already talk about that you're having that opportunity to be collaborative in your approach to evaluation. And it comes back to that earlier point around quality doesn't belong in a department, it belongs to everyone. The degree to which you can get people involved, depends on operational pressures when you do it, all kinds of stuff. But the key is that people feel engaged, and that includes your partners, of course, as well. Step 4, capture your key strengths and weaknesses. So it's not narrative. We're not just talking about whether something is or isn't happening, because that's compliance. We're talking about whether or not it is having a positive impact on the customer, the benchmark, and the QPIs that we talked about earlier. And then there's a note of possible action. So the reason why I've referred to that as a note is because, and I'll say a bit more later on about why I think self-assessment is, forgive me for using a hierarchical term, but it makes sense, hopefully. Self-assessment is bottom up and improvement planning is top down. So that note taking is not necessarily your final improvement plan, because what that often results in is a bloody great big to-do list. So it's trying to get you just to hone that down, but I will come back to it. And the reason why I've got this big bubble with dots around it is around this sense of culture, which I've talked about a couple of times. None of that can work well unless you have the culture that allows and encourages honesty and allows and encourages mistakes, as long as we collectively learn from those mistakes, and that we have a culture of sharing in what we do. Otherwise, it just becomes a process. It becomes well, we do it, but actually, does it really have an impact on the service that we're trying to deliver? And for any of you that may have worked with me before, you'll know that I use this term often. I use it when I'm talking about observations of practice as well. And it's a phrase that the wonderful Mary Meyer uses, who is a schools focused educationalist, but it applies in our setting as well, is you're building a culture of high challenge and low threat. How can we challenge each other rigorously on everything that we do to help us to keep getting better? In order to be able to challenge effectively, then that has to be coupled with low threat. If there is a perceived threat, my job, my team, my content, whatever it might be, the way you're going to speak to me next week, you pointing your finger at me and judging me, then I am not going to be comfortable in a high challenge environment. So the benefit of any quality assurance, but in particular self-assessment, diminishes the bigger the threat is, and therefore the smaller the challenge is. So culturally, to do it well, it has to come with trust. Trust is at the root of self-assessment. Trust is about people knowing that the process is done with kindness, that allows honesty, that results in robust challenge. So that doesn't mean we're not going to occasionally argue about something. That's exactly what you want to happen, actually, that we're going to look at some data, but we're going to have to think about what it means in practice. But we know that it's coming ultimately from a good place. So my fascination with self-assessment is not just because of the discipline of self-assessment and quality improvement, it's how intrinsically it captures the culture of an organization. I can tell so much about the way the organization operates by the way the self-assessment process is carried out. Thank you for that. So David's picked up in the chat that emphasis on trust is such a valuable insight. And I hope if there's anything that you take away from today, I hope you take other things as well, but it would be that think of it not just as the process, the arrow that I showed you before, but the nesting of it within your culture, and that ability to trust that the process is there to help us and scaffold us all to keep getting better. It's not about blame. If you've got a blame culture, you won't be able to self-assess effectively. Okay, so self-assessment is evidence-based storytelling. Here's some practical stuff. Data does not tell the story. Data is the start point of the story. There's a wonderful phrase, I can't remember who coined it, that data is not a mirror of your performance. It is the engine room, if you like. The analytics is the engine room of how you tell the story of your performance. There are people involved in this, and people are complex and challenging and difficult and wonderful and all of those things that you guys know and love and see every day. So we might have all of these things coming out at our data in the bottom, but that doesn't tell the whole story. What we have to do is then look at that within the context of the people that we're working with. So 98% might be amazing for one group of people, but actually we were hoping 100 with another group, and 5 out of 10 might feel rubbish for this particular contract, but actually we were at 1 out of 10 the year before and the year before. So our progress is there. So it's over time. It's not just that point in time, of course, because we're looking for trends, but don't think of the data as giving you all of the answers. It is simply the start point for overlaying the storytelling of what's really happening for our customers and being able to get that across. And perhaps too often self-assessment, I see, overly focuses on the negative. Sometimes people look at things with rose-tinted glasses and the evidence isn't there, but that wonderful phrase of catch people at their best, I think really stands true within a self-assessment space. I'm going to give you some questions, hopefully, to take away and consider. What is it? Let's think of just about this year, in this extraordinarily difficult time that we are all continuing to live through. There are things that we should be celebrating that you have done an amazing job of. So how can we use that self-assessment for the motivational and inspirational tool that it is to help people to reflect on their brilliance, where brilliance has happened? And that's not about rose-tinted glasses. It is about being evidence-based, but it's also about celebrating us at our best. The clock at the top being the representation of always look at it over time. What did your self-assessment say last year? What did it say the year before? Not just looking at that single snapshot. You've got to do a comparison, but I guess you guys would know that anyway. There's a really neat way of categorizing data. I won't dwell on this, but I thought I'd put it in the deck because I thought you might quite like it to consider. And I always quite liked this model of them breaking down data into different categories: input data, process data, outcome data, and context data. And I think in employment support in particular, and actually education, certainly until the change in the most recent Ofsted framework, heavily focused on outcome data. It still does. So if we drew these to scale, you know, I kind of guess we all know which one would be the biggest box, but we are starting to see a more balanced representation of the data that we should look for. So I dropped a slide in here. You will think of other things to go in here just to put those in context. So our input data, the individual socioeconomic background, their prior work experience, their barriers to work, your own staff and experience and qualifications are part of thinking about the data that you would want to look at in all quality management, not just self-assessment. Outcome data, sustainable employment, qualifications achieved, sector-specific jobs, stakeholder feedback. process data is the one that's perhaps had the least focus and has ended up being a bit compliancy. So how have you designed your programs? How much time does the customer spend with you versus how much should they have spent with you? So translating into attendance level observations, thematic reviews, which some of you have picked up on, and that bigger context data, so labour market intelligence that you've got to feed into it. But I don't think there'll be anything new in any of these, but I think the categorization of them can be really helpful in thinking about how you structure your data collation analysis and how it informs not just self-assessment, but your wider quality management approach. So the question that I probably am asked most often is, how often therefore should we self-assess? And my answer, I think you won't be actually that surprised to hear, is how often do you want to, and what works best within the wider context of your organisation. But there are probably broadly two models that people adopt, and certainly for you guys who've put some things in the chat, you might want to say which of these you do, or an alternative to the way that you do it. So in either case, the feed-in, benchmark and QPIs. And what I see probably most often are these two things. So the model on the left-hand side is we undertake self-assessment on a quarterly review basis or periodic basis, twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year. I've just used a quality review example. And within those quality reviews, we actually don't necessarily cover the whole benchmark or all of the QPIs. We just cover the ones that are relevant in that particular time period sometimes. But then what that ultimately leads up to is an annual summary report where we are really focused on what that looks like across the full year. And the other one is people who don't do the quarterly reviews, they go straight to an annual self-assessment because there are other things that are in their quality cycle feed into that anyway, so they don't feel the need to do that. And there's no right or wrong to any of these, of course. It's what you can do with the resource you have, the time you have, and arguably how much risk there is in your current quality. So if your risk is greater and things are not going well, then you might go down the blue side rather than that collation of it once a year, if you are worried that your quality is not actually where you would want it to be when you look at your benchmark and your quality indicators. So there's no right or wrong answer to the way that you do that. It depends on what works for you, how easy it is to collaborate with people, and how easy it is effectively to get people into that headspace when you have lots of other operational things going on. So if you've got questions about that very specifically and any advice you would want, just let Helen know or drop me a note in the chat, and I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you to share some of the experience that we've had along the way too. Okay, so where does it fit in quality management, strategic staff? Why is it so important to effective governance? How does self-assessment fit into the wider cycle? If we self-assess brilliantly, what we're doing is we're evidence-based storytelling. We are telling the story of our customers. We are celebrating what we do. We are recognizing the bits we might be a bit rubbish at. We are not blaming people. We are learning from the mistakes that we make, and we are sharing the good stuff so that everyone gets better, not just this one area gets better. And how we do that from a methodology point of view, there are certainly some things that I can share. There might be some things some of the guys on here can share as well, but there's no right or wrong way. It's what works for you. Just the risk is key. And actually, one other thing I will say on it, it's about it getting to that board level table. The sign-off process is important. If self-assessment just sits within departments and you know it's not getting fed through, you know no one is looking at it, you know the golden thread isn't yet there, then you diminish a process that is fundamentally based on culture or intrinsically linked with culture. So just a few things on this one from me. I said I'd give you a section called Constantly Curious. I'm just checking on the timer, it's fine. Constantly Curious, to help you with some of the questions that you might want to consider. These are very general. I can't go into what your own QPIs are or your own benchmark, but I can give you some things that I hope you will find helpful and motivational at a general level to help your process work. So your big 4 things: don't just ask if something is happening, you are asking if it is happening well. Ask yourself if this is a pattern of improvement. Has it changed over time? And even if it's brilliant, ask yourself how it could be even better. there's some research somewhere in change management space, change leadership space, that tells us that improvement comes most often from encouraging the things that we already do well. And I think sometimes in improvement plans, the whole thing is driven around the bits that are rubbish, instead of saying, how can we get better, or how can we be more consistent, or how can we help that department be able to do what that one's doing, it is equally, if not more important. And if I were giving you one killer question, it would be this one. And I think it's a wonderful way of engaging your frontline staff in the whole process, even if there are people in quality roles that are then doing more, you know, and very specific things. What is it like to be a customer with us? And really challenging yourselves to unravel what that's like. Use the data, use the feedback that you have from customers, use looking around the place that they're coming into, whether it be a virtual room or a real room, you know, depending on how your service offer is at the moment. But what is it like to be a customer with us is the ultimate question, might I say, perhaps, that you're trying to get to the root of. The questions that I've put on this slide, and again, feel free to, you know, take a note or a photo of them if they're helpful to think about even now. I call these the big questions. Let's call them the big audacious questions, because they take us out of the operational important stuff, but get us to think, take a step back and really think about who we are and what we're about. And it's about that celebration again. The big question, what are you most proud of this year? You personally, every single person, what are you most proud of this year and why? And what are your teams most proud of in what they've achieved? The second one, what have you achieved that has had the most significant impact on your customers or your staff, and how and why has that happened? The third one, have you lived your values? And I deliberately haven't said organisational values because they're not just organisational. Have you lived your organisational values, but also your personal values? The next one, what do you want to fix that gets on your nerves? Some of you guys, a bit like me, you know, have backgrounds in Six Sigma and lean improvement and all kinds of stuff, you know, that we go through loads of courses on and we learn things about, and all of them are really important. But ultimately, I really love this question when someone wants to ask me, what is it you want to fix that gets on your nerves? And actually doesn't just get on your nerves, but gets on your customers' nerves. It's the stuff that perhaps aren't in someone's immediate job description, you know, but it's the, I'll give you some examples that aren't customer focused, but hopefully they'll illustrate the point. It gets on my nerves that I'm the only one that ever cleans up the sink area, you know, washes cups. It gets on my nerves that no one seems to change the toner in the printer, so it just sits there like that until I do it. It can be a whole host of stuff. It gets on my nerves that no one's at the front desk to greet customers, and that's really bad for them because every time they come, they have to wait for someone to speak to them. It can be a million things, but it has a way of emotionally allowing you to get the stuff out. and those little things add up to big things. As a change management person, I'm a huge believer in small change is the best change. You move those little things. I notice if any of you travel on trains on LNER up and down the East Coast, the day that they added the sticker in each carriage that points in the direction of the buffet cart, you know, instead of everyone asking the next person, does anyone know which way the buffet cart is? Just those little things, you know, make a huge difference. The next one, what's stopping you being even more successful? Develop from a position of what you're good at already. Don't just think about what you're bad at. And in true root cause analysis, keep asking why. The 5 whys. Why is that happening? Okay, so why is that happening? Okay, so why is that happening? Okay, so, and so on. Because what we can have a tendency to do, and we could get into all kinds of cognitive stuff here, but I won't, is we can go for the easy job. So we put plasters, we put sticky plasters on stuff that's quick to fix, but actually it doesn't deal with what's really going around. So the ability to challenge each other robustly, high challenge, low threat, is about keep going, but why is that happening? Because that's where we make meaningful, long-term, sustainable change from, not by keep putting plasters on things, because we end up with a whole lot of plasters all over ourselves, by just keeping looking at stuff on the surface level. So, final bit from me, improvement plan like a ninja. Self-assessment is linked with improvement planning. You cannot effectively develop an improvement plan if you haven't self-assessed, because it then just becomes too big and cumbersome. It's much easier when they're done together. And equally, there's actually zero point in self-assessing if you're not going to do something about it, which is the thing that moves us from assurance through to improvement. So these final couple of slides I've called improvement plan like a ninja, because actually I think it's a lot simpler than sometimes we make out, and hopefully I'll be able to get that across. I said I'd say a bit about this slide. Self-assessment hierarchically from the customer through to the organisation, bottom up. What is it like to be a customer with us? Let's, through our different layers of departments and people, ask those important questions about what it is like, and use our data to be as objective as we can be in order to organisationally understand our strengths and weaknesses and make sure that it's a conversation at board level. Improvement planning is the other way around. And the reason I say that is because if everyone improvement plans separately, you end up with a disjoint. It's not to say that there shouldn't be autonomy there, and that autonomy to act is important, and the autonomy to have ideas and be innovative and creative is important. But otherwise you end up with, and dare I say it, and I appreciate this won't apply to everyone, when you are particularly a larger employment support provider, there can be a tendency for different officers to work in silo and different contracts to work in silo from one another. So if you want your quality assurance to sit above contract, then it needs to come hierarchically and ownership wise and accountability wise from the board. What are our quality performance indicators, and allowing people to have the autonomy to act within that. So self-assessment, customer out, improvement plan, think of it as a from the board permeating through the organisation with that autonomy to put your own stamp on it. And I only have two things to show you here, because I think they're probably the most important things that I see over and over again on repeat that could be done better. And it's this sense of focusing on the right things. So I've made something up here from a self-assessment report. And what I've said is attendance is too low. 25% of customers regularly miss appointments, resulting in low levels of success into employment. So first thing to say on that self-assessment piece is the most important bit in that sentence is the end bit, resulting in low levels of success into employment. Remember the so what question. I'm not suggesting you would want 25% of your customers to regularly miss appointments, because that's part of your service offer. But always ask the question, what is the result of that? What impact is that having? So we know we've got something from our self-assessment that we want to work on. So I've now captured in what I would say is good improvement planning in green, what the objective is. I appreciate it could probably be worded better, but it's just for the slide space. What does that objective look like, and how will we measure the impact? So the objective that we're setting is attendance on all contracts is consistently good, for argument's sake. And the way that we will measure that is we expect 95% attendance on all contracts by July 2022, and a resulting increase of percentage into employment, because we've already said it's resulting in lower levels of success. And then we have our actions that support that objective. What I see too often is the green bit gets missed out, and it jumps from the red bit to the blue bit. So this is the issue, these are the actions. And it's not clear how we're going to measure the success of them, but equally the objective hasn't been clearly framed. So you lose that strategic sense of it, and you end up with the to-do list. We've got a problem, let's do loads of stuff to try and fix it, and lots of people running around trying to make that happen. My recommendation to you is that what we need to do is make sure we've got the green bit right, but think really carefully about what the progress that you are measuring. So for, I can't see everyone's names, but for any of you guys who use our platform, you'll know that we kind of force this issue very deliberately. So our attendance is currently at 75%, let's say. Where we want to get to by December 21 is our attendance being at 80%, by April 90%, by July 95%. So the progress is about, the measurement is about the progress towards the objective and the impact, not just about the measurement of the activity. And you'll see down there on the left-hand side, I've said, oh, we've implemented X, we've delivered Y, and updated Z. I sit on a number of boards, and too often, people focus on telling me about what's been implemented, delivered, or updated, but aren't updating on the progress that we're trying to make against the issue that we found in the first place. So that's what improvement planning, when it's at its best, is about. Focusing on the right things. So in this case, I've used something that's a problem. Be clear in our self-assessment. Don't jump from red to blue. Think about whether or not we've got the bit in green very clear, and everyone is clear on what that means and what it looks like, and how that then feeds the golden thread into your department, team, performance, and so on, as I'm sure you do anyway. And then that measurement of progress, not just whether you've done the activity. So it's great that you've done it. It's great that action A, B, and C have been done, but is it having an impact? Because if it's not, then we need to rethink what we're doing. And it happens more than you might think that isn't there, and that's not because people are stupid. It's just we've got so much going on that it can be quite hard to get that right at times. Okay, so let me bring you to a close with reminding you of Mary Myatt's comment. It's that we're in it together. If you want it to work, that's where we have to be. High challenge, low threat. The culture of that permeating through the way that we quality assure. And from, this is just a different way of showing the quality cycle earlier on, the different ways that throughout your cycle you link your evaluation to your improvement plan, to your observations, to your thematic inquiries, to your evidence base, and all of the other things that I know that you guys will do that might be different to some of the things that I've talked about today. I'll open up to see if there's any questions. Helen, I'm sure, will come back in because Helen might have something she wants me to pick up on anyway. But I will leave you with my contact details on, because genuinely it's always great to talk to you. So I'm always up for an informal chat over a cuppa, albeit that it's virtual, I guess, at the moment, to share experiences. So thank you very much for coming today. It's lovely to be here. Thank you, IEP, for having me along. Thank you for the feedback. And Helen, let me open this one up.
Excellent. I have seems to be having a bit of problems with my broadband at the moment.
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, so hopefully you.
Is that you gone?
Yeah.
Helen?
So if you wanted to pick up, I know we have a question from Martin. He says, in the punctuality example, would it be useful to share why this has happened?
Yes, yeah, I think it always is, Martin. And I think it's that, it's a really good question, actually. So let me give you a view on it. I think that when self-assessment becomes a pain, and people can feel like, you know, that kind of level one I said earlier on, it like a laborious exercise that takes up more time than just doing the job. And losing that engagement with reflective practices because they're asked to write too much. So there is a real balance between getting people to not write too much, and also, exactly as you say, being clear about why something's happening. Because if you're not clear on that within the narrative to an extent, then of course what you might do is try and reinvent the wheel that just, you've already done that. You know, how often does this happen to you, where someone comes with a great idea and you go, oh, we did that 2 years ago and that's what caused the problem. So I think what you said is actually really, really important. Yes, capture why it's happening. My safeguard around that would be encourage people to write less. And that's harder to do than writing more. it's very easy for us to go off on and say lots of things. Encourage people to write less and get to the essence of it quicker. Thank you very much for the feedback there as well, and thank you for coming, Amanda. Too, just in case Helen can't get back in. Helen, do you want me to just check that you're still there?
Yes, I am here, but I've got very unstable Wi-Fi, so sorry about that, everybody.
No, that's fine. I'm going to actually, I'll pick up on Martin's comment. Martin, do you know what, where that came from with me is when I was doing my master's at university and was struggling to balance small children and work, my professor, one of the cleverest people I've ever met, said to me, she gave the phrase, which I don't think is her phrase, if I had more time, I'd write less. And that has stuck with me ever since, to remind me of how difficult it is to write less. That's the skill. Write less, but evaluate more.
Excellent. That is really good, and I think I certainly agree with that. We've got lots of comments coming in about how much everybody's enjoyed the presentation, Louise, and I know that we'll get lots of people watching the recording as well, so thank you for that. No more questions at this point, but lots of comments around how it's been very thought-provoking and lots of food for thought, so thank you very much for that. For those of you who have enjoyed today's session, joining us on future sessions, and she'll also be joining us at the IEP Digital Technology Conference, so please do make sure you look to enroll and register for that, and come along and receive some more information from Louise. So thank you very much again, Louise, for that. I see some thumbs up popping up. Hopefully I'm not too much.
Have a great
wonderful
day,
to have you, and we will see you on a future session.
See you later.
Thank you.